So with the release of the new Captain America Brave New World movie, I just wanted to break it down and give my review. And I am going to be using a rubric that I made, which is going to focus on 5 different categories, giving a 1 to 5 point scale for each of those. But starting with just my overall thoughts for the movie, I thought there was some good moments and some key elements that did make the movie a draw to begin with. But I think it fell short in terms of a lot of its execution. And I think a lot of this would really have to just be due to the COVID delay, which likely affected the pre-production of this film, in addition to a lot of the different strikes that went on through the course of this movie being made. So I think that's where you got a lot of those little differences that could have made the movie a little bit better in terms of how exactly it was put together. But going through this list now, looking at the cinematography first, I thought that the big thing in terms of cinematography was really a lot of the combat scenes. I would say that about half of them were neat to look at, and then about half of them were not as executed as well, whether that was the different choreography for the fights, or maybe even just in terms of more of a directing side of it, them going on a little bit too long. So I think it could have been edited a little bit better to make this movie a little bit more enjoyable to watch. I thought another thing that maybe needed a little bit more time editing would be a lot of the different CGI, even though there wasn't a ton of it. But I would say that you did have moments that were neat. I did really like the new suit that Captain America wears. I also liked seeing his white suit again in the beginning, and I thought seeing a lot of the different new powers and abilities that he has, I thought seeing that on the big screen was interesting. But in comparison, I wasn't as big of a fan of the new Falcon suit and color theme. So I would say all in all, about half of the stuff here was interesting visually and half of it wasn't, which is why I would give this a 3 on this list. But going to the plot, I also do think this was a little bit of a mixed bag here as well. I did think that some scenes did feel a little disconnected, and maybe certain things could have been trimmed out in terms of deleted scenes for this movie. But I did like more of a connection with the military and him working with the president for the role of Captain America. I did like that the plot did try to be pretty fast-paced and did try to have a few different angles, but I don't think after getting through the full runtime of the movie that you really got that much of a payoff. You also didn't get really enough character development, I would say, for either Sam Wilson or as his new role of Captain America, so I think that could have been a really neat dynamic that was given a little bit more thought. So I wouldn't say there was enough to say that there was some strong plot points in this movie. I would also have to go at 2 in terms of the plot. There was a few intriguing things that did entice me about what they did with the main conflict of the movie, but I do think that it fell flat a little bit, and it was a little unsatisfactory in terms of the climax of the movie itself, or also how the movie ended. But in terms of the acting, I wouldn't say that it was really that bad. I thought you had a good general performance from Anthony Mackie. I would say besides that, there wasn't really anything else that stood out to me. I think you also had good acting from Danny Ramirez, but I don't think there was really enough to put this movie on that high of a scale, but I would have to give it a 3 in terms of the acting. In terms of the dialogue along with the directing, I don't think really enough went into the specific screenwriting. I thought some of the dialogue was a little bit generic. I thought in terms of some of the combat scenes, some of that dragged on a little bit too long, and I would say that would maybe overlap from the cinematography into the directing, because I think a lot of that should have been cut down a little bit. And I think just in terms of where Sam Wilson's at in his career, he maybe shouldn't have as difficult of a time just in terms of some of the opponents he was facing even early on in the movie. And I would say that that was maybe a directing issue in terms of how long those fights played out, or how long that was really left in terms of the final cut. I would also say at times some of the music didn't exactly match the tone of each scene. So I would say you're probably between the 2 and 3 range here, but I probably would have to give it a 3, just being a little bit generous too. I don't think it was bad enough for it to be totally disjointed for most of the movie, but there was definitely moments that did break immersion and did take me out of it, and definitely a lot of unoriginal aspects in terms of the plot and pacing for each scene. But going to the overall setting, I do think just in general that the MCU does provide a boost to all of its movies, just in terms of the universe, or I should say multi-universal tone to the Marvel live action movie. So I definitely say that that's why this movie is a big draw to begin with. But you also have a lot of elements in terms of having the Red Hulk, having the President, seeing Falcon as Captain America. You also got a lot of different international conflicts that allowed for a few trips to international places here, but I would say that that was a little bit rushed. It was also neat seeing Washington, D.C., and you even had a few other states that were traveled to as well. But for this being an MCU movie, whether that was a plot issue or not, I don't think he really did enough to establish the setting. I think there could have been a few other elements that could have been added to connect it better to the rest of the world that we've already established in the MCU. And I think that in addition to that, a little bit more could have been done to really set up the atmosphere for where the MCU is heading, rather than just a few vague lines in terms of the end credit scene. So I would say that the setting was definitely functional, and I would say that there was a few interesting moments, but in terms of it being underdeveloped, I would have to give it a 3 in terms of the setting that this movie takes place in as well. So that would be my grades for this movie overall. I did think it does enough to garner enough interest to check this movie out, but I just don't think there was really maybe enough here across the board for this movie to be put any higher on these listings. But I am interested to see how this affects the rest of the MCU, and I am interested to see the new movies that will continue to set up this next path in terms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But feel free to let me know your thoughts on this movie, and I'll see you later.